Today's dailies. I have with me Kenya's bold newspaper, The Standard and The Daily Nation. We'll get to take a look at some of the news making headlines right here on the front page. It's mostly to do with politics, even as The Daily Nation goes big with the event in the UK that was co-hosted by Boris Johnson and President Uhuru Kenyatta. More details right later on, but let's kickstart the show with taking a look at what's transpiring closer home on the international pages. We begin with Uganda, where the Daily Monitor covers extensively. And there we have it, some of the major stories, of course, related to the health matters in the country. An audit of the lockdown reveals no exit plan. Now, with only 5% of the targeted 21.9 million Ugandans vaccinated, any lifting of the lockdown would likely be only temporary, as infections are likely to spike again. It's sort of the same scenario we find ourselves as Kenyans right now, even as we expect the Ministry of Health to sort of give the way forward in terms of the lockdown and the curfew as well. UPDF soldier filmed slapping, kicking, kneeling man arrested. Of course, good news right there, even as Ugandan snubbed government donation appeal. And find out why in this particular article. More stories right here, but let's cross over to The Citizen. Just highlight some of the stories covered from Tanzania. Government to block over 10 million unregistered SIM cards. Well, the government has blocked 18,000 roughly subscribers identification module, that's the SIM phone, that were found to have been involved in criminal incidents in the country. All to do with the clampdown on insecurity. President Samia to receive another bombardier, even as the president will lead hundreds of other Tanzanians at that particular special ceremony. More details right there. And of course, a sharp focus on Tanzania, even as President Samia led the country, being the first one to officially being vaccinated in Tanzania. The seal of approval as President Samia terminates vaccine fears. It's all to do with the public outlook, and it's all to do with the optimism rather as well, right after that jab by the president. Let's see how the vaccination drive on goes. Over to Rwanda today. What's transpiring here? Rwandan model floated as answer for underfunding to African national parks, where Pan-African Conservation Trust Fund mooted as African governments reduce allocations to tourism. Tunisia political crisis deepens. Of course, the president has come after sharp focus, where he recently suspended parliament and assumed executive powers, and he argues it's all to do with the constitution. Well, read more on this article to be adequately informed. Restaurants, e-commerce firms bear the brunt of the lockdown. Of course, Rwanda extended its lockdown by roughly 5 days in this particular week, and the economy is, of course, taking a brunt. Over to the East African. What's transpiring here in the region? Kenya, Israel to enhance economic security ties. They also agreed to cooperate on projects linked to Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. Good news right there, all to do with bilateral ties. Jubaland elect first 4 senators to Somali parliament. That's the 11th parliament in the country, even as Ethiopia accuses world powers of double standards in Tigray conflict, where they say the TPLF is escalating its violence by attacking regional states. And of course, the federal government playing the blame game one way or the other. More details right there. Over to CNN World News. What's transpiring internationally? Chinese officials meet with Taliban as the United States exits Afghanistan. Interesting developments right here. And of course, the Taliban and the US on different sides, with the Chinese meeting the Taliban. Of course, sharp focus on the international circles around the world, Europe, Middle East, Africa. And of course, in Africa, Hush Puppy, the Instagram influencer who was arrested, has just pleaded guilty to $1 million fraud in the United States, defrauding a Qatari businessman right there. He pleaded guilty. More details, even as that case is set to sort of expand the dragnet of those who might be caught. More details right there. Lebanon's water system on the brink of total collapse. That's according to the UN, even as Malta's government must bear responsibility for journalists' assassination. That's according to an inquiry after the death of that particular journalist. Of course, more details on the latest on the international scene, and we'll keep you updated. But let's shift focus to what's transpiring locally within the borders. And the front page of the Standard goes big with the NASA, which is on its deathbed. We might say it's null and void right now until the parties actually officially submit the letters to the Register of Political Parties. But the front page says why Raila quit NASA, of course, after ODM's decision to sort of walk away from the coalition. And it's all to do with cutting the shackles. Odinga's surprise decision frees ODM from the coalition, addicts and allows it to chart a new course, even as party threatens to withdraw 153 million shillings political parties' funds it had offered to share with its partners. Well, it's all to do with threatening the bigger brother right there, but we'll definitely highlight that particular story in totality. Over to the Daily Nation, the front page, it's all to do with schools and the summit that was co-hosted with the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and President Uhuru Kenyatta, where Uhuru leads the world to raise 400 billion Kenya shillings. And it's quite good news right there, where leaders commit to spend 2 trillion of their domestic budgets on education at a 2-day global education summit in London. The summit was held at a crucial time when the impact of COVID-19 risks rolling back gains made in decades. That's the latest on the Daily Nation, on the front page at least, even as they have an insert right there on the Olympics. When the going gets tough, of course, Kenyan teams that have participated so far have been bundled out, one or the other, from boxing to volleyball, rugby as well. And of course, many Kenyans anticipating the start of the field and track events as of today, where others actually joke that that's when Kenya is actually starting to participate. But we'll highlight this and much more in a way only we can right here on KTN News, as our team is in Tokyo, just to highlight what's transpiring right there. Even as we take a look at that, let's cross over to the Standard, the front page. As I had mentioned, the story is all to do with NASA, and we have seen the developments roll out in the course of the week. I'd like to begin on that particular note, introducing my panelist in studio. I'm joined by Professor Gitile Naituli, who is a former NCIC commissioner. It's great to see you. It's great to have you with us. Good morning.
Wonderful to be with you. Just good morning to your viewers.
Okay. Via way of Zoom from Kwale, we're joined by Kasim Tandaza, who is the Member of Parliament for Matuga constituency. Kasim, if you can hear me, good morning.
Good morning, Jesse. Good morning, our esteemed viewers. It's a bit cold here in Mombasa, but we are enjoying every bit of it.
I can tell you the weather's similar right here in Nairobi, but we'll definitely need your input on the latest intrigues behind NASA and One Kenya Alliance. And thank you for your time, of course. And we'll also be joined by Alex Manyasi from our City Center studios. He's a governance and policy expert. Thanks for your time and good morning. Okay, well noted. Let's start with you, Professor. So much intrigues behind NASA, and I'd like to begin with this particular story where the Orange Democratic Movement has announced its formal exit from the National Super Alliance, saying it is not tenable to sustain the troubled political outfit. ODM's decision, which was arrived at during the party's National Executive Committee meeting, comes days after Amani National Congress and Wiper parties made similar decisions. KTN's Emmanuel Tor with the intrigues with what political pundits are calling the proverbial last nail on the NASA coffin.
The death of opposition coalition NASA had been looming since the 2017 general election and the subsequent political cooperation deal between President Uhuru Kenyatta and former Prime Minister Raila Odinga. It now seems to have been confirmed by the Orange Democratic Movement. ODM's decision came after a 4-hour closed-door meeting of the party's National Executive Committee, chaired by the party leader Raila Odinga.
NASA is the past. To further demonstrate this point, the National Executive Committee of ODM has today resolved to formally exit the NASA coalition.
ODM now vowing to move on and look for new political allies ahead of next year's general election.
For us as a party, we are saying it is now time for us to look to the future, to start discussions with potential new partners, to build a new movement that is going to be providing solutions to the problems that face our people as a country.
According to the NASA coalition agreement, the union could only be terminated if 3 out of the 5 affiliate parties left. The 5 NASA coalition members are ODM leader Raila Odinga, Wiper's Kalonzo Musyoka, ANC under the tutelage of Musalia Mudavadi, Moses Wetangula's Ford Kenya, and Chama cha Mashinani of former Bomet Governor Isaac Ruto. The ODM party, which was accused of bulldozing the other members, has also been at pains to explain how it took 187.9 million shillings, leaving the rest of the members to share 152 million shillings from the political party's fund.
What we have done as a party, and under the guidance and advice of the party leader, is to be magnanimous, to be generous to our friends with whom we have worked with, some of them from 2013 to date. It has nothing to do with liability. We are not liable.
This payment is an ex gratia payment.
It is in the statement.
It is not our interest. How, if we wanted to keep them, why have we resolved to exit ourselves? It doesn't matter. It's a favor.
The developments come days after ANC and Wiper parties, through their parliamentary group meeting, resolved to formally quit NASA.
The idea of NASA served its time, called at its time, called NASA. Now we are looking at One Kenya Alliance, and if somebody gives me a better formulation, I'm willing to listen.
NASA is the past. NASA is history. It is the past. Let us now move forward.
Odinga has announced that he will be making new plans ahead of 2022 State House race.
Lakini ninatoka hapa maneno mpya ya kuunganisha Kenya kwa sababu ya ile handshake.
What remains now is for ODM, ANC and Wiper parties to write to the office of the Registrar of Political Parties to officially announce their decision to quit NASA. But these are just the initial steps in the preparations towards the 2022 general election. Emmanuel To, KTN News, Nairobi.
Okay, so that's the latest intrigues behind NASA. CORD is in the past. NASA is equally in the past. According to some proponents, One Kenya Alliance is the way to go. But let's talk about this. Professor, from where you sit, we just had Edwin Sifuda mention it's out of generosity, not liability. And this actually puts into sharp focus the coalition-forming process in this particular country. Your quick reaction to this?
First of all, I think this is a demonstration of the sloppy nature with which we do everything. We approach everything that we do. This was a coalition made of several parties. These parties ran independent of one another. That's why each of them has members in parliament. They needed to have a clause where that money is distributed to each party by the registrar of political parties, who is the custodian of the political fund, political parties fund. So the fact that they actually have to money go to ODM is very handy for a lot of Kenyans to understand, including me. But also what you need to observe too is the nature with which we generally approach politics. Those coalitions are just vehicles. There is no ideology into them. There is no belief. Kibaki went to power with the NAC. The second time was PNU. That finished his job, 5 years is gone. PNU was also gone immediately after that. And then, of course, we had the coalition of URP and the NTA and
UDA.
No, it was URP and
URP, yes.
And then something. So NTSA or something like that. Now, I think we need to go into serious. We need to take politics very serious because it's a very serious thing. We need to take parties very serious. Parties need to give us something to live for, something to believe in. So these parties have nothing to give to the people of Kenya, and that's why we have to form new ones every 5 years. It's very unfortunate.
Okay, they're special purpose vehicles in one way or the other. Let's bring into the conversation the politician in the group. I know you're allied to ANC, Kasim. Okay, unfortunately, we don't have him online, but let me cross over to Manyasi right now, who's joining us from our I&M studios. And I want to just quote a tweet by Kivutha Kibwana, who asks a critical question. What sense does it make for the One Kenya Alliance trio to exit NASA and then invite Baba to join them in One Kenya Alliance, which is a reincarnation of NASA, according to him? Is this confirmation that Team One Kenya Alliance cannot withstand an ultimate people's swearing ceremony a second time? Of course, poking holes into the coalition forming process. But what say you about this? It seems like we've just changed the script. It's the same monkeys, a different forest.
Just I want to begin by saying that, first of all, I think this level of dishonesty from the parties involved in the quitting of the NASA coalition. I want to say dishonesty because when these parties deposited their agreement with the registrar, it included how they are going to share resources. What is puzzling and to all of us, including what Professor has mentioned, is how then it becomes generosity and not a requirement, and how then, number two, it comes to a point where we are hearing that ODM is receiving all the funds on behalf of NASA. I do not think that if the intention was to fold the parties and join ODM, that would have been a better explanation to understand how the monies were ending up with ODM. But if NASA was a coalition, and therefore even in terms of common sense, if NASA was a coalition and therefore they had an arrangement under which they were to work, and by extension they had an arrangement under which they were supposed to share resources, then the expectation is that the withdrawing of the parties and ultimately what I have seen, by the way, two parties, ANC, and Wiper had already officially withdrawn. The only party that had challenges, which was in the way of, on the way to withdrawing, was Ford Kenya. And so by ODM rushing to also withdraw from NASA, in my view, I can read several things. Number one is to save face. And number two is to show that the other parties were not withdrawing from Baba and therefore diminishing his capacity as Baba to be what he is. Probably, if you look at the Standard, for example, today, the headline is that why Raila quit NASA. And if you think about it, if I was to be asked, I would have said the headlines in the previous withdrawals would have been why ANC, why Musalia Mudavadi, why Moses Wetangula, and why Kalonzo Musyoka ran away from Baba or left Baba. You see, that is the ultimate imagination of what it should be. However, all these other things around the political parties and the other things, if you look at Wiper, for example, Wiper had, I'm trying to say this because of what I believe is going behind the scenes. Wiper had written to the political parties to talk about the aspect of funding and the issue of why they needed to have a discussion, and the registrar had declined. When ODM wrote to the registrar quickly tried to convene a meeting which Ford Kenya, ANC, and Wiper declined to attend because as far as they're concerned, they were saying that the coalition agreement said that they needed to have first of all, internal discussions. If they did not agree, they needed to have, they needed to get an arbitrator. If that did not work, then they went to registrar. But all these mechanisms that had been set by the agreement, none of them were followed, and therefore it's only possible to say that ODM as a party or as a coalition partner was then dictating to what the other members needed to do or were supposed to do, which is a bit unfortunate. And it goes back to the same question around, then what is the strength of even the agreements that we make and deposit? Is it possible that such can be ignored for 4 years and nothing can be done? Then how can it be possible that public funds, because this money that you're talking about is taxpayers' money, can be sent to one party with disregarding every other aspect about the other parties which form part of the coalition? So what we are waiting to see, and what some of us are waiting to see, is then what happens to that money, and then is it going to be shared as had been envisaged in the pact that the partners had shared had deposited with the registrar. If that doesn't happen, then that will be another form of corruption that we will be looking at to see how then we forge forward. And this ultimately is not good for the country, it's not good for political parties, and it's not good for democracy.
Exactly, democracy especially. Let's bring in Kasim Tandaza. What's your take on this? First of all, ODM sort of jumping ship in a ship which was already sinking. Your reaction on that, and perhaps the way forward, because many are questioning why break up NASA only to form yet another NASA with a different name.
Thank you, Jesse. I don't think that ODM is living from a sinking ship. What was the purpose of forming NASA in the first place? The purpose of forming NASA in the first place was to, of course, get power to win the presidency of this country in the 2017 election. That did not happen. And Jesse Madness is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. It was so obvious to me as a politician and as a deputy leader in ANC that if we were in that arrangement and they didn't win, then we somehow needed a different formula. We needed a different formation. We need to do things a little bit different to gain power this time. And then that is the result of it. Remember, just in this country, we don't have any history of formations lasting beyond any election cycle. Remember what happened to NAC in 2002 when Kibaki came in. Of course, NAC, I would say, was the best formation ever. It almost had every political leader, every region, everybody in that coalition. It won, for that matter. But our history, again, NAC didn't last. By 2013, not 2013, by 2007, NAC was not there. So that is the history we have. So for this one, which even did not win, if the one which won will not last, what did you expect of one which did not win? It is obvious that we needed a different formation going forward to actually realize what the leaders and what Kenyans want after every 5 years. These coalitions, I think, are only teaching us one thing. For the ones which have not been able to last, and it's all of them, be it CORD, by the time they were having CORD, we were having a money alliance that time. That was UDF then in 2013, and Kanu, and New Ford Kenya, and we formed another coalition in 2013. But of course, they don't last. So I think what is common in all these formations is the way they are formed, the moment at which they are formed. We seem to be forming coalitions a few months to the date of that general election. And then I think some bit of reasoning is thrown out of the window and some emotions come in. So we really don't scrutinize. We really don't go into the detail of the formations that we normally form. It happened, and that is what has been happening since 2002. So to me, the way forward now, in terms of forming coalitions and formation, we need, I think this is the right time, more or less the right time, so that with probably 12 months to an election, it's not, to me, it should not be so close, not like 4 or 5 months, probably 6 months to the latest. People should be able to sit. I think that time they will be very sober, they will be very objective. In fact, before they even append their signatures into a coalition, first of all, look at their policies. Are they
Okay, internet challenge is right there, but Kasim Tandaza was belaboring his point, perhaps on the intricacies that go behind formation of coalitions. But Professor, at the end of the day, what informs this coalition formations from where you sit? Is it all to do with getting power? Do you foresee a change to issue-based politics behind these formations due to regional interest? How do you see it?
Yeah, what informs the formation of these coalitions is pursuit for power, and unfortunately without an agenda. Because if you have an agenda for that power, that should be able to stick you together. So the fact that they are in rebel after losing an election or even after winning it is an indication that they are looking for power for its own sake, but not to deliver to the Kenyans. Because to deliver to the Kenyans, you have to have something that will lose you together, that fires you, that pursues you in order to deliver that. So in absence of that, then it becomes a special purpose vehicle, as you said, and then disembark after either they win or they fail to win. Okay. So do I see that change? Yes. That is changing, and in a very big way, because the Kenyans are changing. You know, there is something called collective consciousness in society. That collective consciousness, when it rises and leaves the leaders behind, the leaders, new leaders now emerge and occupy the position of those who refuse to rise up with the population. That is why usually you hear people say that any government is an innocent mirror of the people elected it. They are referring to that collective consciousness. Because collective consciousness is low, then you elect leaders of low quality who don't deliver. But once the consciousness rises, it forces those who now seek leadership to rise with it and to propose ideas, propose programs, propose ways of bettering the lives of other people, like Ibaki used to say. Okay. So that is, that I believe strongly that this society has changed, but our leaders are not moving with that change, unfortunately.
Okay, speaking of leaders, Alex Manyasi, I wouldn't want to be in President Uhuru Kenyatta's shoes, and this is why he's expressed interest in sort of managing his succession, sort of pushing for the unity approach between these leaders. And what seems to be on paper is that they're not conglomerating together as he would have envisioned, perhaps. From where you sit, what say you about this debacle on succession, including the third horse race dilemma? Well, what say you?
Yeah, just if you think about coalition building and what the president has been trying to do, around the world, in many economies, including Israel, you'll find that coalition building has always happened. And this always happens to make sure that if you are a contender and you see that you might not garner the numbers, because people will always look at the numbers and see what makes sense in terms of what you want to finally get for you to ascend to power. When you see that that is not possible, then you look for alliances. In our sense, you will find those alliances before the election. Now, the reason why, for example, there's, before I come to your question, there's a lot of hue and cry about the political parties' monies, is because elections are expensive. And because elections are expensive, why then as a country we decided that taxpayers' money will be used to fund especially the major political parties, is because this then eases the burden on people using individual money, and by extension the hope is that you'll have more efficiently run parties, and ultimately then you'll have less corruption when it comes to people ascending to power because they had resources to run parties. But having said that, the president is going through a difficult time because of interests, number one. Number two, of course, it's because the ideologies of the people who form coalitions sometimes. And that's basically why coalitions are harder to run than individual political parties, is because there are different ideologies. People look at things differently. Leaders will come with their own ideas, and therefore merging these ideas into one then becomes very difficult. But it's also important to understand that there is another factor in what is making this difficult. difficult, and I would not be surprised if, for example, the deputy president's factor might be in all this. And anybody who is looking at the political scenario right now then will think about which is the side that I need to be aligned to. And which then will be the side that will win the election. And that is the side that I'll be wanting to be part of. And lastly, but not least, you'll see that ultimately all these principles have at one point or the other said they want to run for president. And therefore, whether you're talking about Salia Mudavadi, whether you're talking about Kalonzo Musyoka, the two of them more specifically have at one point been vice president, and therefore they consider themselves senior politicians in terms of wanting to ascend to the presidency. And therefore, whether you're talking about Raila, Kalonzo, Mudavadi, then who will cede ground for the other? If you look at Raila Odinga, his age is advanced. And so he will want to make it more difficult for anyone then to ascend to power. And I would not be surprised if that is what they're using the political party's money as a carrot for purposes of saying, for you to support us, then we'll need to allow you to have access to that money. If you look at the other partners then, Gideon Moi, Moses Wetangula, then you'll also realize that they have serious stakes in the future politics of Kenya. If you look at Gideon in the Rift Valley, for instance, alone, his stake is so high such that he wants to win a coalition that will win the election because of the William Ruto factor in the Rift Valley, leave alone the country. For Moses Wetangula, for him it's a lifeline in the sense that the only way he'll assert himself as the leader of Ford Kenya and as a leader who then has a space in the political future of this country is to obviously also align himself to a winning coalition. So if you think about all these factors, then ultimately what we see is that there needs to be a common ground for them to agree to back one person. And that common ground, in my view, if you asked me, that they need to seriously think about is then if they're going to go against William Ruto, then who will be the most appropriate person that will beat William Ruto? Number two, who will be the most influential person who will then influence Kenyans? And number three, who will be the person then ultimately who will bring all of them together by having the interest of all of them? That is the difficult mathematics that they need to make. If you were to look at why there's infighting. But ultimately, the ultimate person here is Uhuru Kenyatta. As he looks at all these things unfolding, I'm sure what goes through his mind is what will my retirement be like? Who is the person then who will be at the best of my best interest in my retirement? Who is the person then who will safeguard my interest in future? We have seen presidents in other countries who have left office and have had a lot of challenges having peace. So I'm sure President Uhuru Kenyatta will want then, even if he was to retire, other people have had talk about him returning to government in a different way. But the imagination right now is if he was to retire, in his mind, the family has serious business interests. The future of the family is also in terms of politics. I'm sure they'll want a family member to also show up at some point. How then does he safeguard that future? Kenyans need to know that these are serious interests that ultimately will then be looked at in the coalition building.
Quite so much to think about, even as this coalition formation ongoes. Kasim Tandaza, I understand you're back on the line. As you finalize on your previous point, perhaps let me add this new angle. On page 4 of The Nation, they actually highlight a story where it says, respect Kanu-Jubilee deal. Gideon Moi tells One Kenya partners. And this is all to do with the deal Kanu has with Jubilee in purposes of entering into a new coalition, and they sort of stepped on the brakes in terms of forming One Kenya Alliance, saying they sort of want to see the deal with Jubilee till its final stages. So does this complicate things in One Kenya Alliance? Kasim, kindly unmute.
Thank you. Thank you, Jesse. I was starting by saying probably I should apologize unfairly because blackouts are very common in Kenya. That's what put me off the screen. But Jesse, I wanted to go a little bit where I had left. And I was saying, ideally, coalitions should be formed early enough, devoid of emotions, because when the general election is so near, then somehow the thinking and the realignment becomes blurred. Two, coalitions should also be formed based on ideologies. Fine, different parties have different ideologies, but they should be able to sit and get some commonalities, which will say these are the basics, so that whatever happens, since we subscribe to the same basics, we can keep together because they are coming together on ideologies. But having said that, remember in Kenya, we have in the constitution, rather, we have pre-election coalitions like the one we had, and posts like what now Kanu has with the Jubilee. They are all legal. And definitely there are terminating clauses. There are some exit clauses on those coalitions always, as required by the Political Parties Act. So it is upon every party or each party to decide on which coalition they want. But for One Kenya, which I subscribe to, is that we are open to many other coalitions and other formations which are willing to join us. We are not a closed shop. So even as we exit NASA, let it be known that it does not mean that since the 5 parties or the 3 which have written to the register of political parties have exited NASA, then they cannot come together in another formation. It's not a messy or a noisy divorce the way Kenyans or some other people would want it to. It is a forward-looking divorce in the manner that for us to win the next government, we certainly need to get new players. We certainly need to get other players of goodwill to form the next government. About the Right Honorable Raila Odinga candidature, one, I think we can look at this like in a football team, because that is the best where people have to coordinate. We need defense, we need strikers, we need midfield. Every department has to work for that team to win. Now, when you have a striker who you've been giving penalties, the moment you are given a penalty, that is the ultimate prize for you running the presidency, and you cannot score. You can't score the first time, the second time, the fourth, the fifth, and you continue using the same striker, then I think that team, I would say, in my own view, it's not a serious team. It's not really there to win. Probably it has other purposes. But for this particular case, I believe whatever formation, other players will come to One Kenya Alliance. Or with the time, it might not be One Kenya Alliance, any other name. It should be able now to get a striker who is going to score, because that is the ultimate goal. About the funds, I don't think sharing the monies now will change anything. I don't think even if some people are to lose their positions in Parliament, in the National Assembly, in the Senate, will change anything. We are all now focused towards the 2022 general election and how we should be able to be in government. That is the main focus, Jesse. It's not about the history now of whether we're going to get money, whether one will be losing his or her seat in the National Assembly. I think the focus now has shifted into the main general election and seeing how we are going to be in the next government. Okay. The previous speaker commented something on His Excellency and his desire or his interest post 2022. My advice is, just if you give me 1 minute, I don't think His Excellency Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta has anything to worry. In any case, in Kenya, we don't have history of an incoming government going for the former president. If that were to happen, I think the most acrimonious one, even during the swearing, was the 2002 when Moi was exiting and Kibaki was coming in. I think that was a defining moment. But the Kibaki government didn't go for the late President Moi's interest in any way. And even in this new government, nothing has happened to the former President Moi Kibaki. So we don't have that history of reprisals. And I think the best approach to me would be him to concentrate on his legacy, his Big Four agenda, or whatever agendas he has for this country. Exit, let Kenyans elect the new president, and I believe the country should be able to move on.
Okay, that's proper as a footnote, Kasim Tandaza. And of course, more details on why Raila quit NASA on page 4 of the Standard, even as they highlight some of the intricacies that will follow ahead as we get closer to the election date in 2022. Allow us to take a short break. When we come back, I'll put my panelists to task to explain the latest move by the DCI. They mentioned they recovered 5.7 million in the judge's chambers raid, and of course, sharp focus on this particular